Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Reading Epic Threads. I'm your host, Patrick Gunnels. I'm joining you from Houston, Texas. Today is December 8th, 2025, and we are in the countdown to Christmas. That's right, the countdown to Christmas. So, without further ado, don't forget to go to tulipblooms.shop. Promo code Shapiro for 10% off. Because we are in a time when you can definitely get your hubby, your wife, your son, your daughter, your anybody, an amazing skincare product that smells exactly like heaven, whether it be the Epic Moisture Creamy Body Butter, the amazing Castor Blend Serum, the silky Rainfall Aloe-based amazing lotion, all with amazing natural essential oils, carrier oils, and other botanicals. Tulipblooms.shop. Promo code Shapiro for 10% off. Let us begin. Q drop number 969. Parkland is a distraction. Parkland was specifically organized and designed to distract, test. Watch the news. Actors are acting. Fake. No power. Justice will be served to those playing the game. All. Guns are safe. Trust the plan. Q. From NPR, June 30th, 2016. Prohibition-era gang violence spurred Congress to pass first gun law. Out of the tragedy in Orlando, the deadliest mass shooting in recent American history, something shifted in Washington. First, Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut, and more than 30 of his colleagues held the Senate floor for nearly 15 hours. Then there was a day-long sit-in by members of the House with a pledge to continue the fight when the House reconvenes after the July 4th recess. There was a lot of political will, too, after the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in 2012. But in the end, no new federal gun laws were passed. There was, however, a moment in history when Washington did act on the issue, but it wasn't after a single event. In the 1920s and 30s, the U.S. was dealing with a different kind of gun violence epidemic, a massive increase in organized crime fueled by prohibition. Gangsters like Al Capone were making big money trafficking illegal alcohol, and a key weapon in their arsenal was the machine gun. Quote, those criminals from the mob took advantage of the rise of the portable machine gun capable of firing multiple rounds of ammunition with the single pull of a trigger, says Adam Winkler, a professor at UCLA's School of Law and author of Gunfight, The Battle Over the Right to Bear Arms in America. The menace of promiscuous killings. Newsreels from the period chronicled the violence. In one from 1931, footage shot in New York shows walls along a city street pockmarked with bullet holes and the children caught in the crossfire of gang warfare. Quote, here is Samuel Davino, only 5 years old, pointing to where he was shot in the leg by gangland's ruthless gunmen, the newsreel narrator says. But poor little Samuel is more fortunate than Michael Vengali, who is also 5. Michael met death, and this casket will hold his tiny body broken by machine gun bullets. End quote. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the governor of New York at the time. It's the office he held just before becoming president, and the experience of having these events unfold on his watch stayed with him. When Roosevelt became president in 1933, his fellow Democrats controlled both the House and Senate by substantial margins. And there was already momentum to do something to rein in guns. For instance, Senator Royal Copeland, a Democrat from New York, was promoting a federal ban on the sale of fully automatic guns. Quote, we can never be free from the menace of promiscuous killings until the possession of firearms is everywhere restricted to persons of known character, Copeland said. To this end, I shall press my bill for passage through the United States Senate, end quote. There was talk in Washington of an outright ban on fully automatic weapons, but Roosevelt was wary of that, not because of the Second Amendment, but because of the Interstate Commerce Clause. The Supreme Court had already imposed strict limits on the ability of Congress to regulate commerce. Instead, Roosevelt backed a tax and registration scheme known as the National Firearms Act, which the president signed into law in 1934. It applied to short-barrel shotguns and rifles and to fully automatic weapons like machine guns, and it was supported by the National Rifle Association. How the National Firearms Act of 1934 worked. Winkler, the author and UCLA law professor, notes that when the then president of the NRA, Carl Friedrich, was asked to testify before Congress, he said, quote, he had not given any thought to the question about whether a federal gun law would violate the Second Amendment, end quote. Elsewhere, Winkler says, Friedrich wrote that, quote, protection for firearms does not come from the Second Amendment, it comes just from wise public policy, end quote. And a core part of the policy the NRA supported was a tax of $200. That might not sound like a lot, but adjusted for inflation, it's approximately $3,500, Winkler says. And this was in the 1930s during the Depression. Quote, the $200 tax was not meant as just a tax. It was meant to discourage people from purchasing these firearms, and it was a tool to use against criminals who would illegally purchase the gun, but wouldn't pay the tax, Winkler says. Someone who was caught violating the National Firearms Act faced a much bigger monetary fine, $35,000 adjusted for inflation, and jail time. Of course, there were court challenges, ultimately at the Supreme Court in the case of United States v. Miller. That case involved the prosecution of two men with criminal records who were caught with an unregistered and untaxed short-barreled shotgun. The court decided unanimously to uphold the law. It said that a short-barreled shotgun was not the type of weapon that someone serving in a state militia would ordinarily have, Winkler explains, and thus was not protected by the Second Amendment. How effective was the law? The National Firearms Act is still in place today. If anything, the law is stronger today than when it was originally passed. By the 1960s, it was illegal to import these guns, and by the 1980s, new manufacture for civilian use was outlawed too. Today, the machine guns that are legal to sell are old. There's a fixed number of them. As a result, they are expensive, costing in the tens of thousands of dollars. To those who do wish to purchase one, they must pass an extensive background check, including submission of a photograph and fingerprints, as well as fully register the firearm and receive written permission by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives before moving the firearm across state lines. Then, of course, there's a tax, which remains $200. The guns covered by this law are almost never used in crime. Mark Folman tracks gun violence for Mother Jones, where he is the national affairs editor. Quote, you rarely hear any discussion of fully automatic weapons or machine guns, Folman says. They're just really not part of the conversation in contemporary crime. They don't turn up in mass shootings, end quote. Folman curates a database of mass shootings in America going back 34 years to 1982. It covers a total of 81 mass shootings. Out of those 81 shootings, none is known to have involved a machine gun or fully automatic weapon. From news2a.com, Trump signs one big beautiful bill ending excise tax on NFA, National Firearms Act, items. This article was July 5th, 2025. So very recent. On July 4th, President Trump signed the One Big Beautiful Bill passed by both houses of Congress, eliminating the excise tax on National Firearms Act items, but maintaining the regulation and registration aspects of the same. Gun owners and gun rights groups have expressed strongly opposed sentiments about the outcomes, which has also generated a major joint lawsuit that will challenge the legality of the NFA now that the tax is zero. Many prominent voices in the gun rights community maintain that the only desirable outcome was complete deregulation, observing that future administrations and Democrat majorities could simply reinstate the tax and perhaps increase it based on a cost adjustment from the original 1934 amount. Some assert that such victories only come in small steps and need to be appreciated for what they are, while others argue that we should not accept complacent trade-offs for what are clear violations of the Second Amendment in the form of obvious infringements on civil liberties. Representative Andrew Clyde was a prominent voice in Congress calling for an aggressive pro-Second Amendment approach, writing on Twitter, quote, "The NFA should be eliminated completely." He worked to ensure the Hearing Protection Act and the Short Act were included in Trump's OBBB. That's one big, beautiful bill. In response to the eventual outcome, a number of prominent gun rights groups issued this joint statement, quote, "When President Trump signs the one big beautiful bill, which will eliminate the excise tax on suppressors, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and AOWs, he will have delivered the biggest blow to the National Firearms Act since its passage nearly a century ago. We thank President Trump for his leadership and every member of Congress who fought for law-abiding gun owners throughout the reconciliation process," end quote. This statement was issued jointly by the American Suppressor Association, National Rifle Association, Firearms Policy Coalition, and the Second Amendment Foundation. Various versions of the bill called for a complete elimination of both the NFA and the deregulation of short-barreled rifles and shotguns, as well as suppressors. These were ultimately blocked by a budget reconciliation hurdle known as the Bird Bath, BYRD, which forbids non-budgetary provisions in reconciliation bills. Deregulation of the NFA sought to remove the $200 tax and registration. However, the Senate parliamentarian, an unelected role filled by Elizabeth McDonough, ruled these changes were policy-focused, not budgetary, violating the Byrd Rule. This meant they couldn't be included in the reconciliation bill and would need 60 votes if pursued separately. Republicans chose not to pursue the issue by trying to wrangle the necessary votes or involving the vice president. In a last-minute heroic effort on July 1st, Representative Andrew Clyde proposed an amendment to restore the full deregulation, but the House ultimately passed the Senate's version that only reduced the excise tax of $200 to $0. Although many are disappointed with the failure to repeal fully the NFA, and some have even accused gun rights groups of capitulating, there is a positive outcome in the announcement of a joint lawsuit filed by the Gun Owners of America, GOA, and Gun Owners Foundation, GOF, alongside our allies Palmetto State Armory, PSA, the Firearms Regulatory Accountability Coalition, FRAC, Silencer Shop, SS, and B&T USA. From Newsweek, Trump's big, beautiful bill sparks gun group lawsuit within hours. July 5th, 2025. Several gun rights groups filed a lawsuit to dismantle what is left of the National Firearms Act, NFA, shortly after U.S. President Donald Trump signed his package of tax breaks and spending cuts into law on Friday. Gun Owners of America and other plaintiffs argue in the lawsuit, which they have dubbed the One Big Beautiful Lawsuit, that the Supreme Court had upheld the NFA as a tax statute, and the constitutional justification for it no longer applies once the tax is eliminated. Gun Owners of America also said it is also long argued that the NFA's registration mandates, quote, violate the Second Amendment and are an unconstitutional overreach of federal power, end quote. The authors of the NFA, quote, left no doubt that the NFA was an exercise of the taxing power, and the Supreme Court upheld it on that basis, says the lawsuit, which was filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas. But the NFA no longer imposes any tax on the vast majority of firearms it purports to regulate. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which Congress and the President enacted on July 4th, 2025, zeroes the manufacture and transfer tax on nearly all NFA-regulated firearms. That means the constitutional foundation on which the NFA rested has dissolved, and the NFA cannot be upheld under any other Article 1 power. With respect to the untaxed firearms, the act is now unconstitutional, end quote. The lawsuit asks the court to declare that the NFA's registration and transfer requirements pertaining to untaxed firearms, quote, exceed Congress's enumerated powers and block defendants from implementing, enforcing, or otherwise acting under the authority of the NFA with respect to untaxed firearms, end quote. Q drop number 1690. You are witnessing/watching the systematic destruction of the old guard. Power will return to the people. Q. Q drop number 1373. Pictured from bestpoliticalquotes.com. Yes, he really said this. Abraham Lincoln. We, the people, are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who would pervert the Constitution. They knew this day would come. Evil everywhere. Corruption everywhere. We fight. We, the people. Q. Food for thought, my friends. Don't forget to go to tulipblooms.shop. We are fast approaching Christmas. We have new blends that will blow your mind. Just to give you a tiny little idea of what I'm talking about here. We are talking about a men's fragrance in the beard oil that consists of Australian sandalwood, New Caledonian sandalwood, vanilla CO2 extract organic, ambrette seed CO2 extract, light patchouli, vetiver from Haiti, ambergris 5% concentration in MCT, Atlas cedarwood, Himalayan cedarwood, jasmine sambac absolute, neroli from Egypt, orange blossom absolute, tuberose absolute, and frankincense from Somalia. That is just a tiny little idea of how sophisticated we just got for this Christmas season. It's a beard oil, it's a body oil, it's a face oil, it's Pat's Blend. Get it at tulipblooms.shop. Promo code Rambo. And thanks to Rambo for letting me put the show on his channel today. Rambo presents Reading Epic Threads. Now let's move on to the next amazing piece. From ericc.substack.com. Sovereign Wealth Fund. Paying back what has been stolen. By Erik Carlson, December 8th, 2025. What is a sovereign wealth fund? A sovereign wealth fund is money set aside by a government, usually from oil, gas, or other natural resource profits, to invest for the future. A national savings account where governments put cash in, then invest that cash in stocks, bonds, and real estate to grow wealth and stabilize their economy, creating long-term financial security. President Trump has been talking about paying many Americans a $2,000 dividend payment in 2026. Some view this as being like the stimulus checks that Americans received during the COVID lockdowns, a one-time payment. But the word he continues to use is dividend, which is an income that investments pay on an ongoing basis. This would lead one to believe there will be an ongoing income paid to Americans from America's new sovereign wealth fund. Trump has said the dividend payments will be coming from the money that tariffs have taken in. This is true to a certain extent, but it doesn't tell the whole story, not even close. Trump has been collecting money from countries and companies that have been taking advantage of America and Americans for decades. Trump is forcing those companies to pay back some of what has been stolen from Americans. If these countries and companies don't cooperate, they will no longer have access to the American market, the biggest market in the world. This is a deal that everyone has to accept, begrudgingly or not. They must accept the deal if they wish to survive. I'm going to cover a lot of ground and tie a lot of things together. This may be one you need to reread. We hope the thoughts that might be floating around in your head start to connect with other ideas, and things start to make a little more sense when you conclude that everything has worked in conjunction for a very long time. In other words, things aren't as random as they may have appeared. Let's go back to the fall of the Soviet Union in the late 80s into early 90s. The fall of the Soviet Union was not simply the collapse of a failed system, communism. It was Russia refusing to be the City of London's puppet any longer. When this occurred, the City of London needed to find another tool to use in controlling the world. They chose Communist China. The City of London was consolidating their military superpower, the Soviet Union, the economic superpower, the US, into one, Communist China. Using a communist country affords many advantages, though through the use of slave labor, with people having no rights, profits could be much higher. It was at this time, with Bill Clinton in office, that manufacturing really started to move from the US to China. Bill Clinton was and is a City of London puppet. He was a Rhodes Scholar. The Rhodes Scholar program is one of the ways the City of London indoctrinates and chooses its American puppets. Quickly, China was producing goods that would be sold in Walmarts throughout America, undercutting other manufacturers and retailers in the States, oftentimes taking over towns because domestic manufacturers and independent stores could no longer compete. It's not simply a coincidence that Clinton and Walmart both come from Arkansas. They worked hand in glove to destroy American manufacturing. American deep state politicians willingly sold out their country for a piece of the pie. America quickly went from a manufacturing economy to a service economy. In 1994, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, also played a major role in getting manufacturing out of the US. The globalists had achieved their goal of no longer paying a living wage for manufacturing in America, while at the same time making America dependent on foreign manufacturing. When the factory doors were shut in America, and mind you, this process started much earlier, it transitioned to technology development and becoming a service-based economy. DARPA. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, is an independent research and development agency within the United States Department of War, DOW. Created in response to the launch of Sputnik in 1957, DARPA stands as our nation's commitment never again to face a strategic technical surprise. DARPA is responsible for much of the technology we use on a daily basis: the internet, social media, GPS, Siri, the list goes on and on. DARPA uses American tax dollars to develop technology, and if that technology can be used for non-military purposes, the CIA creates companies and installs figureheads to appear to run these companies the CIA controls. A similar thing happens with Big Pharma. Big Pharma uses Americans' tax dollars to develop drugs. Then they bribe politicians and government agencies not only to okay the use of the drugs, but in some cases to recommend them or even mandate their use. These drugs are then sold back to the American people who unknowingly and unwillingly paid for their development, sold to them at rates 10 times higher than to people in other countries who didn't pay for their development. Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, all are CIA-controlled companies with technology developed by DARPA. I believe Tesla, the car company, was freed from their CIA control much earlier on than the rest of the American tech companies. Many have been freed from their CIA chains in just the last few years. Some have deep state influence, and sabotaging is still happening today. Laughably, Hollywood is commissioned to make movies to convince the public of stories like Mark Zuckerberg stayed up all night at Harvard eating pizza, drinking Red Bull, while coming up with the algorithms that social media is based on. This is done so we have no idea who really created these companies. We are to believe that around the same time, a bunch of awkward and nerdy guys independently, through their genius, innovation, and drive, built the biggest companies in the world. No one asks how the biggest companies in the world all happened to come into existence within the past 20 to 30 years. DARPA uses American tax dollars to develop technology. And then the CIA creates and controls companies to dispense this technology to the public. Some people know the story of how the CIA's data collection operation, LifeLog, shut down the same day Facebook started up in February 2024. What a coincidence. Facebook, a social media site where people throughout the world let it be known where they are, where they've been, whom they know, and what they think. 1,000 times more effective way to monitor people than what the CIA was trying to do through LifeLog. Why? Because no one will be willing to give the CIA all their information, but they will give it to social media. Back to the Sovereign Wealth Fund. On my trip to Japan and South Korea in April of this year, I observed that 98% of the cars in both countries are domestic, and less than 1% of the cars on their roads are American. By contrast, half of the cars on American roads are foreign. You see the disparity here. We buy from them, but they don't buy from us. This isn't to demonize Japan or South Korea. The Japanese and Koreans are looking out for their own countries. And no one before Trump ever demanded the trade deals to be fairer. Trump recently went to both countries, and both have agreed to put hundreds of billions of dollars into the American economy. Trillions of dollars have been committed to the U.S. worldwide. The tariffs are said to be bringing in billions of dollars as well, and where the dividend checks will come from. While I believe that billions will be brought in through tariffs, I believe much of the money foreign countries are committing to the U.S. is payback for the decades of stealing from Americans. This isn't just being brought in from foreign countries, but from CIA-created and CIA-run American companies as well. A few weeks ago, Facebook had their earnings call. Earnings looked great, but their stock price dropped 10% in after-hours trading. Why? After digging a little deeper, you find that Facebook had to pay a one-time $16 billion tax bill to the U.S. government. After reading everything I've just written, you got to understand, or at least consider, that this is Facebook having to add to the sovereign wealth fund that Trump has created. They're having to pay back some of what they've stolen from the American people. Do you remember before Trump's inauguration in early 2025 how he created an inauguration fund? Certain American CEOs each gave $1 million to the fund. To them and to Trump, this is like a drop in the bucket. This was symbolic in nature. This was Trump telling them he would allow them to prosper, and this kissing of the ring was a symbol of their submission. They would no longer work for the CIA, but rather they would work for America. Godfather-like theatrics. Trump has created a sovereign wealth fund that holds all kinds of assets, stocks, bonds, real estate, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, gold, silver, and other commodities and rare earth minerals. This wealth fund will be used as a means of making and keeping America rich. And it's being funded by the companies and countries that have stolen from America for far too many years. Have you ever wondered why the price of gold, silver, AI tech stocks, and Bitcoin have shot up so high, mostly during the last 2 years of Biden's fake presidency? This occurred even though literally all of the jobs that were said to be created the last 2 years of Biden's presidency have been exposed as being fake and made up. Maybe these assets, gold, silver, Bitcoin, and AI stocks, were being purchased and put into America's sovereign wealth fund. It makes sense that if America controls AI technology, cryptocurrency, and a lion's share of hard assets like silver and gold, that it will continue to be the world's leader. America can't be ignored or left out. It has made itself irreplaceable and unexcludable. The price of Bitcoin is actually down for the past year. There have been many considerable drops in its price during this time, each followed by a recovery. Is this a matter of crypto whales being forced to sell their shares, and afterward those shares are being bought up and put into the sovereign wealth fund? It's plausible, and a better explanation than anything I've heard anyone else come up with. Will we have temporary turndowns in the price of gold, silver, or AI stocks where certain investors are forced to sell and these shares are quickly scooped up by the sovereign wealth fund at a lower price? Many AI stocks were down 10 or 20% in November and have already fully recovered. I've done a little speculation here. It's hard to argue, though, that what I've said is plausible. It's possible that Trump has been building this sovereign wealth fund since his first time round in office, and even more so that he was building it during Biden's fake presidency. It seems even more obvious that Trump has been going around collecting money from foreign countries and American companies since he has been officially back in office. What does this all mean? I believe it means Trump will no longer allow the globalists to take advantage of America and Americans. I believe he is collecting debts or fines for their past abuse. Trump is building an investment portfolio that makes America the owner and Americans the recipients of its prosperity. I believe this sovereign wealth fund will at some point allow Americans to receive dividends from it. It will allow the government to pay down its debt. It will someday be able to pay for the running of the American government, allowing federal income tax to be a thing of the past. The golden age is coming. Everybody go to erikc.substack.com. That's ERIKC.substack.com. For those of you who don't know, Erik, he just watched a little show called Reading Epic Threads, and he sent me emails, and they were good emails. So I read them on my show. So his emails got longer. They got more frequent. I started dedicating shows to him. And then he finally made a Substack. By the way, make sure to hit the like on the Substack because, that's important. This Substack, I think it was released in fact, I can tell you when it was released. It was released 35 minutes ago, and it's already got 18 likes. That's pretty good. All right. Finally, but before, of course, we get to the final piece today, I want to remind everybody, if you order your tulip blooms it's going to be there in time for Christmas. It'll be there in time to give the gift of good skin to the people you love. The Blue Calm Face Oil, guys. This stuff contains irreplaceable blue tansy essential oil. You know, I think that the blue flower in the movie Batman Begins is a sly reference to the magical blue tansy, because the blue tansy has these properties that de-redden the skin. Now, I'm pushing 50. I think that I would look a lot different if I hadn't had these products to use. So go to tulipblooms.shop. A big thank you to Joe Rambo. So use promo code Rambo for 10% off. My friends, it's time to give the gift of good skin for Christmas. Tulipblooms.shop. Promo code Rambo. Now let's do this thing. I have to do... There we go. All right. I'm ready. By the way, that first piece that I read was from Rootbitch. This one, also from Rootbitch. Let's start with a little video, shall we? Piece is called The Winged Hussars.
The year is 1683. Across the plains of Hungary, the earth trembles beneath the weight of empire. 150,000 men marched west, an army so vast it takes 3 hours for its columns to pass a single point. The crescent banners of the Ottoman Sultan blot out the summer sky. Leading them is Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, commander of the most feared army on earth. He has carved a bloody path through the Balkans, leaving conquered cities smoking in his wake. Now he turns his gaze toward Vienna, the golden apple of Europe. If Vienna falls, the road to Germany lies open. If Vienna falls, Italy trembles. If Vienna falls, the fractured kingdoms of Christendom collapse like dominoes. The Sultan has promised Mustafa a golden apple, the ancient symbol of world dominion, if he delivers this final jewel. Europe knows what is coming, yet Europe does nothing. The Holy Roman Empire is weak, divided by politics and pride. Its emperor has already fled Vienna. France watches from the shadows, unwilling to help its rival Austria. The Italian states bicker among themselves. Protestant and Catholic still nurse wounds from wars that tore the continent apart. The great powers see only their own interests. None see the abyss opening beneath their feet. Only one man believes the darkness can be stopped. King Jan III, Sobieski of Poland. He is 60 years old, a warrior since youth, a veteran of 30 battles against Turk and Tatar alike, a man of faith so deep it terrifies those who do not share it. Where others see despair, he sees duty. Where others see impossible odds, he sees the hand of providence calling him to stand. His kingdom is exhausted, his treasury empty, his army numbers only a few thousand, but his faith burns brighter than the sun over the Carpathian mountains. He sends word to Vienna, "Hold, I am coming." He does not ask permission. He does not wait for promises of payment. He simply gathers every man who can ride and begins the longest forced march in Polish history. Because Jan Sobieski understands that some moments transcend calculation.
From Catholic.com. Under Mary's holy name, Victory in Vienna, a thrilling tale from the history of Christendom, provides important lessons for modern Catholics. As Christian Europe tore at her own throat during the 30 Years' War of 1618 through 1648, the Ottoman Turks missed a golden opportunity to strike their centuries-old enemy. Why? They were themselves absorbed with war in Persia. Moreover, they were beset by a turbulent period of harem intrigue and governed, or not, by a string of ineffectual and self-indulgent sultans, one of whom was deposed and two of whom were murdered. The last of these was Ibrahim I. He was deposed and murdered, known as the Debauched. Ibrahim was famous for his vigorous and unusual harem enthusiasms, although at one point he had the whole lot of them drowned in the Bosphorus, 280 ladies in all, when he discovered that he was not the only man enjoying their affections. A liaison one night, however, with a Russian concubine produced the son who would reverse Ottoman fortunes. Mehmed IV was what we would call today an outdoorsman. He preferred hunting to war, but unlike his recent predecessors, he made decisions and stuck by them. Indeed, history remembers Mehmed for two decisions in particular. The first was to give control of the empire to the Koprulu family, which produced a series of grand viziers who restored internal order to the empire, recaptured many of the Aegean islands from Venice, and extended the boundaries of the empire northward through battlefield victories in Transylvania and Poland. Best known and last of these grand viziers was Kara Mustafa Pasha. Kara Mustafa Pasha was the source of Mehmed's other famous decision. In the summer of 1682, the Grand Vizier persuaded his Sultan to violate the Peace of Vasvar and lay siege to Vienna. A century and a half had passed since Suleiman the Magnificent had tried and failed to take the fortress city on the Danube. Mehmed was determined not to fail, and more than that, he was convinced, like all sultans before him, that the Ottomans were, as conquerors of Constantinople, the true heirs to the patrimony of the Roman Empire. The Habsburgs in Vienna were impostors who needed to submit to the rule of Islam. By the autumn of 1682, the Ottoman army had crossed the Bosphorus and proceeded to Adrianople. There, the Sultan wintered his army, and as they trained for war, he read and reread the abundant accounts of earlier Turkish campaigns into Eastern Europe. Along the road of march to Belgrade, in Ottoman hands since 1521, bridges and roads were repaired. A draft or ban was proclaimed for auxiliaries throughout the empire, and Arabs, Bosnians, Bulgars, Greeks, Macedonians, and Serbs poured into the White City to await the arrival of Mehmed's force, led by his 12,000 Janissaries. Among the Sultan's army were Protestant soldiers loyal to the Magyar Lutheran Imre Tokoli, who looked to the Islamic East to back his dubious claim to the throne of Hungary. Less detestable than Protestants allying themselves with Islam against Catholic Habsburg rule, but considerably more savage and fearsome, were the Sultan's mobile shock action cavalry, the Tatars, descendants of the bloody convergence of Sarmatians, Scythians, and Mongols. These natural horsemen were the stuff of nightmare. Like the African corsairs who raided the coastal fishing villages of Italy in the 16th century, the Tatars were the front line of the Ottoman slave trade. Rape, pillage, plunder, and arson composed their modus operandi, tales of which made their way as far as France and England. To the villagers on the Christian Ottoman border in Hungary and Poland, however, the Tatars were no mere story to frighten ill-behaved children. They were a terrifying reality. To the Polish, Lithuanian, and Austrian soldiers who had faced them in battle, they were extraordinary archers capable of a rapid rate of fire and deadly accuracy from their short bows, and all from the saddle of a galloping pony. In March of 1683, as the army left Adrianople amid great fanfare, a sudden squall blew the Sultan's turban from his head. All his men, from the highest-ranking officer to the lowliest conscript, recognized the bad omen. Superstitions aside, spring storms swelled rivers, and the usual fords required pontoon bridges to cross. At Belgrade, Mehmed handed the flag of the Prophet, a facsimile because the original had been captured by the Venetians at Lepanto a century before, to his Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa, and with it command of the Ottoman host. Mehmed remained in Belgrade to hunt and play. The real ruler of the Ottoman Empire, Kara Mustafa, pressed north for Buda, sending his siege cannons up on barges up the Danube. Buda had endured Turkish occupation since 1541, another conquest of Suleiman the Magnificent. The Church of Our Lady there to this day bears in one alcove the decorations of the building's days as a mosque. Was it a misguided ecumenical gesture, or is it a reminder of what may come again to a West grown soft and inattentive? By the second half of June, the Turkish army, now greater than 150,000 strong, had arrived in Buda. There, the Grand Vizier announced to his war council his plan to take Vienna. "It is for thee to command and for us to serve," answered the governor of Damascus. Following the Danube west, the Turks pressed on for Vienna, raiding and burning along the way. Leopold I, the Holy Roman Emperor, could no longer deny that Vienna was the Ottoman objective. The man who had guided his country through the 30 Years' War ruled an empire pinched between a France under the Sun King, Louis XIV, determined to expand eastward, and the Ottoman Empire resurgent. The condition called for a less vacillating character than the emperor, who permitted himself to be talked into abandoning Vienna. Two men of sterner stuff he left behind: Count Ernst Rüdiger von Staremberg to command the garrison of Vienna, and Charles Sixte, Duke of Lorraine, to command the imperial army in the field. It bears noting that the heroic figure for whom the Siege of Vienna is most remembered, John Sobieski, arrived in the 11th hour. Both Staremberg and Lorraine, severely outnumbered, acquitted themselves well throughout the 2-month siege, masterfully resisting the Turks and prudently delaying a decisive engagement until the Polish and Saxon reinforcements could muster. The Turks arrived at the walls of Vienna on the 12th of July. On the 13th, an emissary from the Grand Vizier rode to the city's walls with an invitation to surrender the city and submit to Islamic rule. Staremberg declined. On the 14th, the Turks began to bombard the city's walls. The walls of Vienna had been much improved since the medieval days, when they were first constructed, paid for by Richard the Lionheart's ransom. By the 17th century, the city's defenses included all the designs developed in Italy during the Renaissance, mutually supporting bastions and ravelin, scarp and counterscarp, glacis and curtain wall, tightly packed earth faced with brick and gently sloped, both absorbed and deflected the rounds from the Turkish bombards. But the walls were not strong everywhere, and the Turks, located on the south side, Vienna's weak spot between the two bastions, fronted the imperial palace. Toward this point in the wall, they began a process at which they were very good: the steady digging of parallel trenches to close on the city's defenses, followed by mining, the digging of underground galleries to be packed with explosives to tumble the walls from beneath. By August, the combination of mining and artillery fire had taken its toll of the city's outer wall and seriously damaged the palace bastion. Musket ball to arrow, pike to cutlass, and hand-to-hand encounters in the ditch, and on the ramparts grew more frequent and more fierce. Viennese counterminers clashed with Turkish sappers in torch-lit underground tunnels, flamboyant and fearless. Staremberg, a pistol in each hand, was ever in the thick of these contests, yet he knew that without relief, the fighting would soon be street to street and house to house. In the plains and woods surrounding Vienna, Charles Siste, with his small force of 10,000 horse and no infantry, critical for seizing and holding terrain, did his best to limit the depredations of the merciless Tatar raiders. Dozens of villages south of the Danube were put to the torch, their women raped, their men slaughtered.
Kara Mustafa sits in his silk pavilion, dining on lamb and honey while Vienna starves. He builds a city of tents so vast it takes an hour to walk from end to end. He invites foreign ambassadors to watch the siege as theatre. He is patient. He has already won. Time and hunger are his allies. His officers urge a direct assault, but Mustafa refuses. Why sacrifice men when starvation will do the work? He does not look north. He does not imagine anyone would be foolish enough to challenge him. All of Europe watched the horizon burn and believed Vienna would fall. The question was not if, only when.
As grim as events appeared, hope was within sight. 4 days after the start of the Turkish bombardment, John III Sobieski, King of Poland, marshaled his army of nearly 40,000 in Warsaw and began the 435-mile march southwest toward Vienna. A similar force under John George III, Elector of Saxony, came southeast from Dresden. A third force came straight east from Munich under Maximilian II Emanuel, Elector of Bavaria. They united near Krems, some 40 miles upriver from Vienna. The Holy League, under command of Sobieski, now began its difficult passage through the Wienerwald, known to us as the Vienna Woods, the 30 miles long and 20 miles wide expanse of thickly wooded foothills that dominate the terrain southwest of Vienna. Moving the artillery over steep slopes and rugged ground cut with ravines was particularly difficult, but by the 11th of September, the Christian force had reached the Kahlenberg Ridge. Looking down on the plain below, they saw the countless brightly colored tents of the Ottoman hosts stretching north toward the city walls. Sobieski also saw that the south slope of the ridge was of the same difficult terrain as the rest of the Wienerwald and was crisscrossed with high stone walls of vineyards and farms. The descent to the plain below would be as painstaking as the climb, but also under attack from Janissary skirmishers. Before dawn, Sobieski assisted at Mass in the ruined church of the Camaldolites, offered by Marco di Viano. Gathering his force, he commended their mission and their souls to the care of the Blessed Virgin. The descent began. As the sun rose on the morning of September 12th, the Ottomans saw, according to their own account, a flood of black pitch flowing down the hill, smothering and incinerating everything that lay in its way. Taking one ridge at a time, the Christians fought their way down the hill. Little could the commanders do but exhort their forces to press ahead in the confusion. The Saxons on the left of the Holy League line were the first to engage the forward deployed Ottomans, but by 10, the whole Turkish army was arrayed for counterattack. For several hours, the battle traded advantage, the Holy League ever closing on the city. By late afternoon, Sobieski's army had reached the plain, and he was now positioned to exploit his greatest asset, the famed Winged Hussars. Drawing up these courageous cavalrymen, their feathered plumes streaming off their backs, he led them himself, lances couched in a full tilt charge at the center of the Ottoman line, shouting, Jesus, Maria, Ratui. They charged and reformed, charged and reformed, charged and reformed. The Polish horsemen followed their intrepid king deeper and deeper into the army of Islam, smashing what remained of their resistance, setting the followers of Muhammad to flight, relieving the siege, and carrying the day.
Cry for help in time of need, await relief from Holy League. 60 days of siege outnumbered and weak. Sent a message to the sky, wounded soldiers left to die. Will they hold the wall, or will the city fall? Dedication, that outnumbered 15 to 1. And the battle's begun, and the Winged Hussars arrive. Coming down the mountainside. Then the Winged Hussars arrive. Coming down, they turn the tide. As the days are passing by, and as the dead are piling high, no escape and no salvation. Trenches to explosive halls are buried deep beneath the walls. Let the charges there and watch the city there. Desperation, it's a desperate race against the mind. And the race against time, and the Winged Hussars arrive. Coming down the mountainside. Then the Winged Hussars arrive. Coming down, they turn the tide. Cannonballs are coming down from the sky. Janissaries, are you ready to die? We will see the vengeance I for a night. You'll be stopped upon the steps of our gate. On this field you're only facing our hate. Not upon the salt concealing your fate. September doesn't make me here. Now was free. We made the enemy bleed. And the Winged Hussars arrive. Coming down the mountainside. And the Winged Hussars arrive. Coming down, we turn the tide. And the Winged Hussars arrive. Coming down the mountainside. And the Winged Hussars arrive. Coming down, we turn the tide. We remember in September when the Winged Hussars arrive.
Back to the article from Catholic.com. We came, we saw, God conquered, Sobieski wrote to Pope Innocent XI. The Polish king entered the city fetid with parade and feast. Writing to his wife, Sobieski described Vienna's gratitude, quote, all the common people kissed my hands, my feet, my clothes, saying, ah, let us kiss so valiant a hand. The event was the last great Ottoman effort. Their borders receded. Within 3 years, Buda was back in Christian hands. 1 year after Sobieski's victory, Pope Innocent XI, also dearly remembered for his explicit condemnations of usury and of, quote, mental reservation, extended the feast of the Holy Name of Mary to the universal calendar of the Roman Rite to honor the great victory that Our Lady had granted the Christian West. When it fell out of fashion 3 centuries later in 1969 to recall the heroics of Christian soldiers against the enemies of Jesus Christ, the feast was removed from the liturgical calendar. In 2002, however, Pope St. John Paul II restored the feast. It is hard not to imagine that the trade tower attacks of the preceding year were to the fore of his thoughts when he did. But that we do not know. We do know that Islam is an age-old enemy of the Christian West, and that the West, the United States included, emptied of Christianity, is also emptied of meaning.
The Hussars rode at the vanguard, those legendary knights who had become myth even while they still lived. Warriors clad in armor that gleamed like captured sunlight. Wings of eagle feathers rose from their backs, mounted on wooden frames. Not decoration, but weapons of psychological warfare perfected over generations. The wings made them appear larger than life, and the sound, that eerie whistling roar when 3,000 hussars rode at full charge, was the last thing countless enemies ever heard. Each hussar was a lord of war, armored head to foot in plate and mail, carrying an 18-foot lance of hollow wood, light enough to couch under one arm, yet strong enough to punch through a man and his horse together. They were nobility. They owned lands. They had servants and titles and wealth. Any one of them could have stayed home in safety. They rode to Vienna anyway, because honor demanded it, because their king called, because some things matter more than survival. They were the last true knights of Europe.
Also, I find it interesting that as I research history, I keep finding examples of Polish people being remarkable, like Jan Sobieski. I grew up in an era of Polish jokes. Now it seems as if they've all morphed into dumb blonde jokes. For example, what did the Polish mom say when her daughter became pregnant? "Are you sure the baby is yours?" I never really thought about it at the time, but now I wonder whether they created the Polish joke theme to denigrate Poles because they knew how much of a threat Poles could be. The most important point from all of this is that we have been conditioned all our lives to see things from an us against them perspective. Stories like the Winged Hussars can lead Christians to see Muslims as the enemy. Even within Christianity, Catholics can be pitted against Protestants, etc. Our owners, as George Carlin would say, are more than happy to let us divide ourselves, but we, the people of all races, religions, etc., must stay united, not divided, as stated in Q drop number 2994. People are pawns in their sick game of global domination. People are divided to prevent a rising of the people. People are divided and taught to fight themselves instead of the ruling class. Race versus race, religion versus religion, political versus political, class versus class, sex versus sex. When you are divided, you are weak. When you are weak, you have no power. When you have no power, you have no control. Stay strong, patriots. Stay united, not divided. You are what matters. You, awake, is their greatest fear. Q. from CatholicNewsAgency.com. Pope Leo XIV marks Nicaea anniversary, urges Christians to overcome divisions. Pope Leo XIV commemorated the 1700th anniversary of the First Council of Nicaea on Friday in the Turkish city historically known as the birthplace of the Nicene Creed, calling Christians to overcome the scandal of divisions and to renew their commitment to unity. The Pope spoke during an ecumenical prayer service held at the archaeological site of the ancient Basilica of St. Neophytos in the shore of Lake Iznik, southeast of Istanbul. The gathering marked one of the most symbolic moments of his apostolic visit to Turkey, which has focused heavily on ecumenical and interreligious outreach. Quote, "We are all invited to overcome the scandal of divisions," he said, urging Christians to nurture, quote, "the desire for unity for which the Lord Jesus prayed and gave his life." Pope Leo and Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I, considered first among equals among Eastern Orthodox bishops, were welcomed by two senior Orthodox bishops before proceeding to a platform beside the submerged ruins of the basilica. The two leaders stood before icons of Christ and of the council and lit candles together.
During this ecumenical prayer, together with the heads of churches and representatives of Christian world communities, we have recalled that the faith professed in the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed unites us in real communion and allows us to recognize each other as brothers and sisters. In the past, there have been many misunderstandings and even conflicts between Christians of different churches, and there are still obstacles preventing us from achieving full communion. Nevertheless, we must not relent in striving towards unity. We must continue to consider each other as brothers and sisters in Christ and to love one another accordingly. Inspired by this awareness, 60 years ago, Pope Paul VI and Patriarch Athenagoras solemnly declared that the unfortunate decisions and sad events that led to the mutual excommunications of 1054 should be removed from the Church's memory. That historic gesture by our venerable predecessors inaugurated a path of reconciliation, peace, and growing communion between Catholics and Orthodox, which has been fostered through frequent contact, fraternal meetings, and promising theological dialogue. In light of the advances already made, significant steps have been taken at ecclesiological and canonical levels, and today we are called even more to commit ourselves to the restoration of full communion. In this regard, I wish to express my deep gratitude to His All Holiness and the Ecumenical Patriarchate for their ongoing support for the Joint International Commission for Theological Dialogue between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. I also hope that every effort will be made to ensure that all the autocephalous Orthodox churches return to take an active part in this endeavor. For my part, in continuity with the teaching of the Second Vatican Council and my predecessors, I wish to confirm that while respecting legitimate differences, the pursuit of full communion among all those baptized in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit is one of the priorities of the Catholic Church. In particular, it is one of the priorities of my ministry as Bishop of Rome, whose specific role in the universal church is to be at the service of all, building and safeguarding communion and unity. In order to remain faithful to the Lord's desire for us to care not only for our brothers and sisters in faith, but also for all of humanity and the whole of creation. Our churches must respond together to the promptings of the Holy Spirit today. First of all, at this time of blood-stained conflict and violence in places both near and far, Catholics and Orthodox are called to be peacemakers. This certainly means taking action, making choices, and adopting gestures that build peace, while also acknowledging that peace is not merely the fruit of human effort, but is a gift from God. Peace, therefore, must be sought through prayer, penance, contemplation, and nurturing a living relationship with the Lord, who helps us to discern what words, gestures, and actions to undertake so that we can generally be at the service of peace.
From the letter of St. Paul to the Romans, chapter 12, verse 18, if it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Peace is the prize, but only for those men and women who are willing to stand against the evil of this realm. I don't care if your religious beliefs differ from mine, whether you're Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, etc. I have no interest in any holy wars for or against you. Furthermore, for my fellow Christians who want to fight me simply for having a different opinion on some of the finer points of our faith, like the filioque, co-redemptrix, etc., please ask yourself who is pulling your strings. We can debate those things later, but for now, all I ask is that you unite with me in the fight against the evil of this realm. Q drop number 925. This is not about religions or party affiliation. Evil is everywhere. There are no drawn lines, no boundaries, good versus evil. Q. Q drop number 4545. Humanity is good, but when we let our guard down, we allow darkness to infiltrate and destroy. Like past battles fought, we now face our greatest battle at present, a battle to save our republic, our way of life, and what we decide, each of us, now will decide our future. Will we be a free nation under God? Or will we cede our freedom, rights, and liberty to the enemy? We all have a choice to make. Evil, darkness, has never been so exposed to light. They can no longer hide in the shadows. Our system of government has been infiltrated by corrupt and sinister elements. Democracy was almost lost forever. Think HRC install, 2+ Supreme Court justices, 200+ judges, rogue elements expanded inside DOJ, FBI, CIA, NSA, White House, state, removal of Second Amendment, border, etc. America for sale, China, Russia, Iran, Syria, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda expansion of surveillance of domestic citizens, modify/change voter rules and regulations to allow illegals and ballot harvesting with Supreme Court-backed liberal social opinion, sell-off of military to highest bidder to fight internal long-standing wars, their thirst for a one-world order, destruction of national sovereignty, serves to obtain control over America and her allies, think EU, by diluting your vote to oblivion and installing a new one-world ruling party. The start of this concept began with organizations such as World Health Org, World Trade Org, United Nations, ICC, NATO, etc., all meant to weaken the United States. Also, the formation of EU through threat, con, of close proximity attack. Attack on one is an attack on all, sales pitch to gen public. Fear control. EU. Did each member nation cede sovereignty to Brussels? EU. Each member must implement EU rules and regulations in all areas. Think immigration, currency, overall control. Their thirst to remove your ability to defend yourself serves to prevent an uprising to challenge their control. There is a fundamental reason why our enemies dare not attack, invade our borders, armed citizenry. If America falls, so does the world. If America falls, darkness will soon follow. Only when we stand together, only when we are united, can we defeat this highly entrenched, dark enemy. Their power and control relies heavily on an uneducated population, a population that trusts without individual thought, a population that obeys without challenge, a population that remains outside of free thought and instead remains isolated, living in fear inside of the closed-loop echo chamber of the controlled mainstream media. This is not about politics. This is about preserving our way of life and protecting the generations that follow. We are living in biblical times. Children of light versus children of darkness, united against the invisible enemy of all humanity. Q. Q drop number 4790. A picture of the sunrise, captioned, "God woke you up for a reason." And that's the show. Support what we do here. Go to tulipblooms.shop. Order right now. Use promo code Rambo for 10% off. You order right now. If you order in the next few days, really, we can pretty much guarantee you're going to get delivery by Christmas. You want to give these things as gifts. You want to give supple skin, the power of essential oil scents and aromatherapy. And tulipblooms.shop, promo code Rambo for 10% off. Don't forget. Big thank you to Joe Rambo for letting me extend the reach of this show onto his wonderful Rumble channel. You can also find my Rumble channel at P. Gunnels on Rumble. Hit the thumbs up on this either way. Really helps when you do that. Helps get Joe on the leaderboard and all that stuff. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Let us pray. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. Thank you all so much for being here. I love you all, and I'll see you next time.